Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show. We have not yet talked about any statewide news, headlines, or legislative items. That changes now as we bring in Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com. Scott, good morning. How are you?
Doing well. You've got happy Braddock, not grumpy Braddock.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's just because they're not in session.
But life is so different when the circus leaves town.
Now, wait a minute.
You can kick back on the weekend, have a cigar, have a drink. There's no problem.
Scott, hang on. Now, every now and then I challenge you here on the show.
Go for it.
You're in Austin. Does the circus really ever leave town?
Well, that one circus leaves town.
Okay.
Then you've got Austin. Then you've got Austin City Hall. Then you've got all the crazies down on 6th Street.
You got scooters
scooter in the world.
Yeah.
By the way, I was trying to tell people this was a real, sort of a genuine suggestion on my part, and I was attacked all over social media. But I'll say it here on the radio because in Lubbock it would apply. If you want more scooters, if you love the scooters, bring your truck to Austin, load it up, and take them home. Because I see all these tweets from people that say, "Can't I have the scooters in my town?" And I know y'all have had the flaming scooters there, but there's all these people in Houston who keep saying, "We want the scooters, we want the scooters," and they've started to have some of them there. But people thought I was, criticizing the scooters. I'm like, no, take some home.
Yeah, you're wanting to share. You're wanting to spread the wealth of scooters.
I try to be magnanimous, and they still mistake me for grumpy. Must be something about my face.
Unbelievable, Scott. Let's see. Let's start off with legislation that has been signed or legislation that has not been signed. Mm-hmm. It looks like at least one of those big bills will be signed this week by the governor.
Well, the big bills, of course, are the budget, the school finance bill, and the rollback rate election bill. Those, of course, are HB1, SB2, and HB3. I was checking on those this morning after you had asked about them in an email, and no, they haven't been signed yet, but there are some ceremonies still yet to come. We're coming up to the end of the veto period, of course, which there's 20 days after the legislative session in which the governor can say yes or no to legislation, big and small. And I know that you've been a big fan of all of his sort of Trump-style videos, just the quick iPhone videos that say I've signed this or signed that. Some of the things that he had signed, some common sense stuff. Like there was one I thought was a really good bill that says that you can't lose your occupational license just because of student debt. He had also signed a bill that says that the way you can get certain things delivered to your home, now you can have beer and wine delivered to your home, and he said to enjoy responsibly. And he also in one of these drive-by signings had signed the red light camera bill, banning those. And so those things are all underway. As we talked about here on the show, his policy shop and his financial, his fiscal policy experts, all those sort of folks are in his office. They've gone over everything. And he put out a video, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where the governor had, just stacks and stacks of pieces of legislation saying, "Look, what will I do?" Almost like a game show. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, man. Apparently the governor will sign HB3 into law tomorrow at, I guess, an elementary school there in Austin, Palmer Elementary School. There, I don't know if that holds any big significance or if it's just an elementary school, but
he, sometimes with these, and Governor Perry used to do this, and I haven't seen where Abbott. I'd have to go back and check if he did this in the last two legislative sessions. It's because it's a ceremonial thing. Sometimes they sign the bill sort of more than once for different television cameras. So he might sign it in Austin, then he might go to a middle school in Houston or something, and then maybe go to a school in a town near you, and basically sign the same bill and hand out pens. And it's all it's always an exciting thing. But this governor has done his signings in an interesting way. Some of them do get the big ceremonial signing like that, and then others get just the iPhone video. And back in 2017. Some very controversial and major legislation like the Sanctuary Cities ban, as we talked about on the show, that was signed just on a Sunday night with a Facebook Live video, which the authors of that bill did not even know he was about to do it that way. So some surprises in store sometimes with this governor.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. I guess a story that is still out there, and Scott, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but with the plumbers, I know there's a rally that's been scheduled for this week by some of the plumbing organizations out there. The governor last week said, "Don't worry, I got you. You're not going to have to worry about anything." But we haven't heard any details yet, right, on how the governor plans on saving this plumbing commission?
What the governor had said was he had been given some tools by the legislature to be able to extend the life of the agency, which I'm trying to figure out what he means exactly. Every few years in Texas, periodically, the state agencies are reviewed to make sure that they're running efficiently, and sometimes the question is whether the agency should still exist at all. And I see that there are some people who think that the agency ought to just go away in this case, that there should be no state licensing of plumbers. A lot of folks in the construction industry and the governor's office as well disagree with that and say that, when you're talking about the folks who deal with sewage and drinking water and, making sure that natural gas lines are connected correctly so there are no explosions, maybe that does require some regulation. I think
but
there are
Scott,
a lot of conservative people who agree with that, but not everybody.
Didn't the governor come out like a couple of years ago and said that he was in favor of getting rid of this board?
He had talked about, maybe delicensing, maybe not the right word, but deregulation of, some of these things. And I saw where Empower Texans had been taking him to task because they feel that maybe some of the occupational licensing in Texas is over the top. There have been debates about whether folks like cosmetologists ought to have licenses, barbers and people like that.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, if you're going to be holding a straight razor to people's heads, you probably ought to have a license for that. That's my take.
I don't know. Maybe you're in for adventure, Scott. I mean,
right? Maybe. Well, I always am. But some people make that argument. Others will say that, look, when it comes to basic safety, that you ought to have the state, doing something. It's interesting. The unions, to extend the blade metaphor, I think they kind of cut their nose off to spite their face with this, because they were against the changes that were proposed that would just make it easier to get a license. I mean, there are conservatives, including the governor, who had made the case that it shouldn't be so hard to get a license. It is, and I just think objectively ridiculous, that it can take 8 months to a year to get a license to be a plumber in Texas. And as we've talked about on KFYO, the reason for that is because in this state of 30 million people, the only place you can take your test to be a plumber is here in Austin. Yeah. That's pretty ridiculous. You would think that they would have field offices in Dallas, Fort Worth, Lubbock, Houston, San Antonio, et cetera, where people could get those license requirements fulfilled, but not right now the way this system is set up. And so the idea was to take the plumbing board, which is an antiquated agency, move it over to the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation so that they could do tests in other places. They have field offices in other parts of the state. But the unions, of course, want to control the labor supply. They want there to be higher barriers to entry for this. And I think that they're wrong. I think that it ought to be easier, but it should still be something where there's a basic state license that you get so that you're ensuring some safety here. And we're going to see what sort of legal gymnastics the governor's office is going to go through to try to extend the agency on his own. As I mentioned, these agencies are periodically reviewed, and it's the legislature that has jurisdiction over those agencies. It's in the Texas Constitution that all state agencies and all state employees, and when I say agencies, even the office of the governor is under the jurisdiction of the legislature. And so Matt Martin was raising the question last Friday here on KFYO about whether the governor really ought to be able to do this on his own. There is some question about centralization of power here. And a lot of times those arguments might make people's eyes glaze over, but I think for a lot of conservatives it could be concerning, because the governor, if he can extend a state agency on his own, that might mean he can kill a state agency on his own, or it might mean he could make changes to a state agency
or create a state agency on his own.
Or create a state agency. That's right. So people have some serious questions about that, although I can tell you that when it comes to matters of convenience, the legislature usually rolls over for the governor. If he was to say, we have to have a special session, and even if it was just going to be a 24-hour or 48-hour special session on a weekend, which they could absolutely do, Chad, he could say, y'all come in on a Saturday in July and just pass this bill and go home and be back to your travel plans or whatever else by Monday. There's a lot of lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats alike, who would say, you know what, why don't you just handle that on your own? I already have my tickets booked for wherever.
Yeah. Very interesting. Also, some news on the governor. If folks go back to the last session, the governor said that he would, I guess, go against a little bit of tradition, and he endorsed candidates in primaries that were going up against elected officials, and it doesn't look like he's going to campaign against any incumbents this year.
They are continuing the theme of unity among Republicans. That's been the big theme during the legislative session, of course, the big kumbaya session that we talked about all throughout the first part of this year. In 2017 into the 2018 cycle, That was not true. You had the governor, and it's not unusual for governors to endorse candidates, by the way, but it is unusual for them to endorse against incumbents, which Governor Abbott did endorse 3 candidates against incumbents. Only one of them won the race, by the way, down in Galveston and Chambers counties. But the candidates that the governor supported over incumbents in Houston and San Antonio lost their races in Republican primaries. And look, you don't want to if you're a sitting member of the legislature, it makes your race harder, at least, if you have the governor spending money against you and weighing in your race. Because, look, no doubt the governor is the most popular Republican in this state. He's actually the most popular office holder in this state. And so it's very problematic for you if you've got the governor against you. This time around, it sounds like he got his way on the major pieces of legislation, so he doesn't have any reason really to go against any of these folks. And we should remind people that the reason at a core, at a base here, the reason he went against incumbents in 2018 was because some of them had questioned some of his authority in 2017, specific to making appointments to boards of regents. It's always been controversial that you have, and this is not just specific to Abbott, but with governors Perry, Bush, Richards, etc., it was often the case, and continues to be the case, that if you're a major contributor, if you give a lot of money to the governor's campaign, then he'll put you on, the board of regents of certain university systems, or put you on the board of Parks and Wildlife, or whatever. You may be buying access, as some people would like to say, and there were some Republican office holders who think that that's not right, and it just so happens that those who said that was not right were the ones who incurred his wrath in 2018.
Now, the average citizen, this is not what I'm about to bring up. This is not something they even cared about or were upset with the governor about, but there were lawmakers who were upset. And this is something that, I've heard from lawmakers, I'm sure you have as well, Scott, that the governor has not, unlike Governor Perry, Governor Perry would send money to different candidates, would send money to and involve his money in different campaigns.
Oh, yeah.
Governor Abbott, not so much. He's got a huge war chest, but he doesn't really, spread the wealth among Republican officials as much as previous governors. Do you think that'll change in this upcoming election season? If this was kind of the do no harm to Republican legislative session, and Republicans are so worried about Texas turning blue in 2020, keeping the House, keeping the Senate, do you think the governor's going to kind of open up that war chest a little bit?
It was a big criticism, especially when the governor went into the last the last campaign cycle, with more money in the bank than the Republican National Committee. Folks around the state were wondering why he wasn't sort of opening the wallet and helping out Republicans who were up against some Democrats. He actually did do a little bit of that heading into the 2018 general election, and I think that Republicans are going to be looking for him to, sort of provide a backstop for them going into an election in which the Democrats seem to have the wind at their back. I know we've talked about it a lot here on the show, and I don't think it's alarmist at all to say that there are at least 7 or 8 House seats held by Republicans right now in the Texas House that are probably threatened, with President Trump at the top of the ticket and the volatility that he creates there. The midterm elections in 2018 largely about President Trump, right? And that's always the case, that the president is front and center even when he's not on the ballot. Just go back to the 2010 elections when President Obama was at the top of the ticket, and what happened at that time? Texas Republicans took a supermajority in the Texas House, largely based on the fact that there were a lot of people who didn't like the things that President Obama was doing. I think in 2018 you saw a lot of that happen, with 12 seats being picked up, going the other way, with Democrats picking up seats in the Texas House, 2 seats in the Texas Senate the Democrats picked up. A lot of that you can attribute to people who were just upset with President Trump. Now, one of the X factors here is going to be the fact that the races are sort of delinked now. As we talked about, those races are not just the one-punch straight ticket voting anymore, especially in places like Dallas County and Harris County. That's going to make a big difference. And so you've got Republicans who are down ballot from the president, who are basically going to have a message that they don't quite say this explicitly, but what they mean is, I don't care what you do when it comes to the race for the presidency, but let me tell you about what I did as far as providing property tax relief, providing more money for Texas public schools, et cetera.
Yeah. All right, Scott, tell folks what they can find at quorumreport.com.
Well, you mentioned HB3 being signed. One of the things that we want to look into is to figure out exactly what HB3 means for the public school systems around the state. Some of them are already sort of grumbling about the idea that what they were told about the recapture payments, that's the Robin Hood system, that some of that is not exactly accurate the way it was painted during the legislative session. It is the case that a lot of times when these major pieces of legislation are being passed out of the legislature, especially on the school finance bill, that the members of the House and Senate didn't really get a chance to fully read the conference committee report and understand it before they went and voted on it. So there are some things that are going to be interesting as far as how this is implemented. We're going to get into all that in depth at quorumreport.com. And, of course, whenever there's breaking news with your state government, we've got it for you. Free email sign-up is there at quorumreport.com. We only bug you with real news, not fake news, at quorumreport.com.
Very good. Scott, as always, appreciate it. We'll visit with you next week.
Thanks, Chad.
See you, Scott. That's Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com.